The T-34 was a Soviet medium tank that had a profound and lasting effect on the field of tank design. Although its armor and armament were surpassed later in the war, it has been often credited as the most effective, efficient and influential tank design of the Second World War. At its introduction, the T-34 possessed an unprecedented combination of firepower, mobility, protection and ruggedness. Its 76.2 mm high-velocity tank gun provided a substantial increase in firepower over any of its contemporaries. Its heavy sloped armor was difficult to penetrate by most contemporary anti-tank weapons. When first encountered in 1941, the German tank General von Kleist called it the finest tank in the world, and Heinz Guderian confirmed the T-34 tank's vast superiority over existing German armor of the period. The T-34 was the mainstay of Soviet armored forces throughout the Second World War. Its design allowed it to be continuously refined to meet the constantly evolving needs of the Eastern Front. As the war went on, it became more capable, but also quicker and cheaper to produce. Soviet industry would eventually produce over 80,000 T-34 tanks of all variants, allowing steadily greater numbers to be fielded as the war progressed despite the loss of thousands in combat against the German Wehrmacht. Replacing many light and medium tanks in Red Army service, it was the most produced tank of the war, as well as the second most produced tank of all time. The T-34 had well-sloped armor, a relatively powerful engine and wide tracks. The initial T-34 version had a powerful 76.2 mm gun, and is often called the T-34-76. In 1944, a second major version began production, the T-34-85, with a larger 85 mm gun intended to deal with newer German tanks. The T-34 was one of the best protected tanks in the world in 1941. Armor thickness was enhanced by the sloped armor shape, which provided protection in excess of what armor thickness alone would indicate. The T-34 was powered by a Model 5.2-34 38.8 L V12 diesel engine of 500 horsepower, giving a top speed of 53 km/h. It used the coil spring Christie suspension of the earlier BT series tanks, using a slack track tread system with a rear-mounted drive sprocket and no system of return rollers for the upper run of track, but dispensed with the heavy and ineffective convertible drive. During the winters of 1941-42 and 1942-43, the T-34 had a marked advantage over German tanks through its ability to move over deep mud or snow. Especially important in Russia's twice-annual mud seasons without bogging down. The Panzer IV, its closest German equivalent at that time, used an inferior leaf spring suspension and narrow track that tended to sink in such conditions. The T-34's armor proved problematic for the Germans in the initial stages of the war on the Eastern Front. In one wartime account, a single T-34 came under heavy fire upon encountering one of the most common German anti-tank guns at that stage of the war. Remarkably enough, one determined 37 mm gun crew reported firing 23 times against a single T-34 tank, only managing to jam the tank's turret ring. Similarly, a German report of May 1942 noted the ineffectiveness of their 50 mm gun as well, noting that combating the T-34 with the 5 cm KWK tank gun is possible only at short ranges from the flank or rear, where it is important to achieve a hit as perpendicular to the surface as possible. However, a military commissariat report of the 10th Tank Division, dated August 2, 1941, reported that the frontal armor could be effectively defeated within 300-400 m by the 37 mm PaK-36's armor-piercing shot. According to an examination of damaged T-34 tanks in several repair workshops in August to September 1942, collected by the People's Commissariat for Tank Industry in January 1943, 54.3% of all T-34 losses were caused by the German long-barreled 50 mm KWK-39 gun. As the war went on, the T-34 gradually lost some of its initial advantage. By the end of 1943, it had become a relatively easy target for German 75 mm armed tanks and anti-tank guns, while hits from 88 mm armed Tigers, anti-aircraft guns and PaK-43 anti-tank guns usually proved lethal. A report estimated that, with a target angled 30 degrees sideward, A Panther tank could penetrate the turret of a T-34-85 from the front at ranges up to 2,000 meters, the manlet at 1,200 meters, and the frontal hull armor at 300 meters. According to the Panther fable, the T-34's glacis could be penetrated from 800 meters and the manlet from 1,500 meters at 30 degrees sideward angle. Ground trials composed by employees of an IBT polygon in May 1943 reported that the KWK 36 88mm gun could pierce the T-34 frontal hull from 1,500 meters at 90 degrees and cause a disastrous burst effect inside the tank. The F-34 76.2mm gun, fitted on the vast majority of T-34s produced through to the beginning of 1944, was able to penetrate any early German tank's armor at normal combat ranges. When firing APCR shells, it could pierce 92mm of armor at 500 meters. The best German tanks of 1941, the Panzer III and Panzer IV, had no more than 50 or 60mm frontal armor. The F-34 also fired an adequate high-explosive round. The gun sights and range finding for the F-34 main gun, either the TMFD-7 or the .4-7, were rather crude, especially compared to those of their German adversaries, affecting accuracy and the ability to engage at long ranges. As a result of the T-34's two-man turret, weak optics and poor vision devices, the Germans noted, T-34s operated in a disorganized fashion with little coordination, or else tended to clump together like a hen with its chicks. Individual tank commanders lacked situational awareness due to the poor provision of vision devices and preoccupation with gunnery duties. A tank platoon would seldom be capable of engaging 3 separate targets, but would tend to focus on a single target selected by the platoon leader. As a result, T-34 platoons lost the greater firepower of 3 independently operating tanks. The Germans also noted that the T-34 was very slow to find and engage targets, while their own tanks could typically get off 3 rounds for every one fired by the T-34. When new German tanks types with thicker armor began appearing in mid-1942, the T-34's 76.2mm cannon had to fire at their flanks to assure penetration. After improved German Panzer IVs with a high-velocity 75mm 2.95 inches gun were encountered in combat in 1942, a project to design an entirely new Soviet tank was begun, with the goals of increasing armor protection while adding modern features like a torsion bar suspension in a 3-man turret. This new tank, the T-43, was intended to be a universal tank to replace both the T-34 and the KV-1 heavy tank. However, the T-43 prototype's armor, though heavier, was still not proof against German 88mm guns, while its mobility was found to be inferior to the T-34. Finally, although the T-43 shared over 70% of its components with the T-34, manufacturing it would still have required a significant slowdown in production. Consequently, the T-43 was cancelled. Not only were the weapons of German tanks improving, so was their armor. Soviet firing tests against a captured Tiger I heavy tank in April 1943 showed that the T-34's 76mm gun could not penetrate the front of the Tiger I at all, and the side only at very close range. A Soviet 85mm anti-aircraft gun, the 52K, was found capable of doing the job, and so derivatives of it were developed for tanks. The resulting tank gun could penetrate the side armor of a Tiger I from a distance of 800 meters and the turret side from a distance of 600 meters. It was still not enough to match the Tiger, as a Tiger could destroy the T-34 from a distance of 1,500 to 2,000 meters, but it was a noticeable improvement. With the T-43 cancelled, the Soviet command made the decision to retool the factories to produce an improved version of the T-34. Its turret ring was enlarged from 1,425mm to 1,600mm, allowing a larger turret to be fitted and thus the larger 85mm gun. The prototype T-43's turret design was hurriedly adapted by Vyacheslav Khrushchev at the Krasnoye Sermovo factory to fit the T-34. This was a larger 3-man turret, with radio. Now the tank commander needed only to command, leaving the operation of the gun to the gunner and the loader. The resulting new tank, The T-34-85 was seen as a compromise between advocates for the T-43 and others who wanted to continue to build as many 76mm armed T-34s as possible without interruption. Production of the T-34-85 began in February 1944, first using the 85mm S-53 gun and then in mid-1944 the 85mm ZISS-53. The improved T-34-85 became the standard Soviet medium tank, with an uninterrupted production run until the end of the war. A T-34-85 initially cost about 30% more to produce than a model 1943, at 164,000 rubles. By 1945 this had been reduced to 142,000 rubles. During the course of the Great Patriotic War, the cost of a T-34 tank was reduced by almost half, from 270,000 rubles in 1941, while in the meantime its top speed remained about the same, and its main gun's armor penetration and turret frontal armor thickness both nearly doubled. The T-34-85 gave the Red Army a tank with better armor and mobility than the German Panzer IV tank and Stu G3 assault gun, though it could not match the armor or weapons of the Panther or Tiger tanks. However, its improved firepower made it much more effective against Panthers and Tigers than earlier models. In comparison with the T-34-85 program, the Germans instead chose an upgrade path based on the introduction of completely new, expensive, heavier, and more complex tanks, greatly slowing the growth of their tank production and aiding the Soviets in maintaining a substantial numerical superiority in tanks. By May 1944, T-34-85 production had reached 1,200 tanks per month. In the entire war, production figures for all Panther types reached no more than 6,557, and for all Tiger types 2,027. Production figures for the T-34-85 alone reached 22,559.